It's time for ROTD Weekend. I'm going to be honest with you. I make almost the same things for dinner all the time, in maybe a 2-week rotation. I'm not sure how it happens, but even when I'm trying to come up with new ideas, I end up back in the same places. And I think it's a little bit because there are 4 of us in this house and, one of the adults doesn't have a huge number of things that they love. And then, of course, I've had my 2 children for the whole time that I've had them. And there are certain things that between us just all overlap and everybody likes. And that list is not super long. It's a fairly small, maybe exactly around 8 to 10 things that all of us really enjoy. And so I tend to fall back on those things over and over again. But I've been paying attention in the last few months now that my youngest is 13, my oldest is 16, and they are trying more things in restaurants when we go out. They order more interesting things. We actually had king oyster mushrooms just before Christmas at a restaurant. Marty and I ordered them as an appetizer, and both of my kids tried them and liked them. At that same meal, I ordered beef carpaccio as an appetizer, and they both tried it and really liked it. So they're more open to trying things, and I guess less upset when they don't like things and are more able to adapt in those situations. And so I am determined this year, this new welcome to January 2025, to start getting just a little bit more playful. And for myself, when I'm thinking about what am I making for dinner tonight and something comes into my mind, to try not to change it too much just to suit all 4 of our palates and kind of let some things go and see what happens. Maybe they will like the beef carpaccio or the oyster mushrooms, you know what I mean? And so with part of that, I've been thinking about, of course, January, the whole cliche, getting a little healthier. And also it is Veganuary, which is sort of an attempt to have more plant-based foods. People do a Veganuary challenge where they eat plant-based or vegan all month. I'm not going in that direction, but I think I want to do a little bit more vegetarian and vegan cooking for a couple of reasons. One of them is, of course, that it is healthier, better for the planet, better for our bodies, all of that. But also, I think because I don't do it that much, I think it's going to push me and make me come up with things that all of us will like that will be different from the things that I usually make that all of us will like. You know what I mean? So I really want to embrace this. I have done a lot of meatless Mondays over the year, maybe 2 a month, maybe more 1 a month. I have tried to do that at times, but I am really, really going to be trying to do 2 times a week, at least vegetarian, if not vegan, and start just trying some new vegetables, some new flavors. I told you guys about the air fryer shishito peppers this week. Those have been a big hit. Just all kinds of new ingredients and things without stressing myself out too much. Just okay, today is the day I'm cooking vegetarian, and let myself go with that. And like I said, without trying to overly curtail or adjust everything to that Venn diagram of the 4 of us, let some things maybe go out of those boundaries a little bit further. So on that theme of trying new things and Veganuary and me trying to be a little bit more vegetarian and vegan with my kids and Marty in our household, I am delighted to tell you about today's guest. She is a pioneer in the vegetarian and vegan cooking world. Her first book, Vegetariana, came out in 1984 when vegetarianism was more like a niche thing or a weird lifestyle choice. And then, her books became vegan when she did. And now she is a vegan cookbook author In a time when vegetarianism and even veganism are not weird niche lifestyle choices, but are very mainstream, either for people doing it all the time every day or this sort of adventure that I'm embarking on to add a little bit more in. It is part of regular culture now, and we have Nava to thank for this to a large extent with these wonderful books. Beloved by so many, you know you're in good hands when you have one of Nava's cookbooks with you. In fact, one of her books that originally came out in 1992 is now in its fifth edition. Seriously, that's how good it is. Vegan soups and stews for all seasons. Oh, you guys are going to love this conversation. Nava is so amazing. Let's dive in and listen now. Hello, Nava. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I am so excited to talk with you. You have so many wonderful cookbooks and really have had an amazing career. Congratulations on this veganism cookbook food writing career. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I started early and I keep going.
Yeah. So your most recent, edition of a book is the Vegan Soups and Stews for All Seasons. When did that first come out?
I think it first came out in, believe it or not, 1992. And at the time, it was a small hand illustrated book that I couldn't find a publisher for. My agent took it around and everybody said, it's too niche. Can you imagine? And it was vegetarian at the time. It was still too niche. So I decided to self-publish. It sold very well. That would be more difficult today. And then a publisher decided to take it on. So this has gone through, an unusual life. Self-published, then Little Brown picked it up, went out of print, self-published again, then Random House picked it up, went out of print, and now I have the edition that I have always wanted because this is the ultimate with beautiful photos and a beautiful design. Everything was in my hands this time.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful book and with this beautiful history. So why was it back in 1992? Why vegetarian soups are now vegan soups? Why are soups the things that you wanted to do a whole book about?
I've always absolutely loved soups, and I was going to say, who doesn't love soup? It really is, it feels like one of the most nourishing and nurturing types of foods that you could make for somebody or make for yourself or your family. I don't know anybody who says, I don't like soup. There's no such thing.
Yeah, no, well, and I guess there's so many different varieties too. Like you might not like borscht, but you might like chicken noodle soup, right?
True. And in my case, I might like vegan chicken noodle soup, which I have in this book.
Really? Okay. How do you do vegan chicken soup?
Well, interestingly, I think one of the reasons people like soup or gravitate to certain soups is because of childhood nostalgia. It brings us back to the warmth of our home, our security, our moms. So my mom, may she rest in peace, was not that great of a cook. But I do remember this was the days where we could walk home for lunch from school.
Mm-hmm.
And she would open a can of probably Campbell's chicken noodle soup.
Yes.
So it's associated with my childhood and being able to go home for lunch. It's not that difficult. And in fact, I say almost everything can be veganized nowadays. What's in chicken noodle soup that's not vegan? It's the broth and the chicken.
Uh-huh.
So we use a well-flavored vegetable broth, and there are so many chicken-like products out there now. I tend to gravitate to baked tofu, which has a little bit of a chewy texture.
Uh-huh.
But I would say that if I'm under the weather, if somebody's in my household is under the weather, we still go to the vegan chicken noodle soup.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, you're right. There's so many products available. And so baked tofu, are you baking that or you're buying it already like cooked?
Yes, for people who aren't familiar, people are more familiar with the tub type of tofu, very bland, takes on the flavor of whatever you put in it or cook it in. baked tofu does come packaged usually in 6 or 8 ounce packages. It's a very firm kind of tofu. It's already flavored. Often it's either sesame ginger or teriyaki. There's a smoked kind, which is
Mm.
out of this world. And basically, it's a ready to eat product. You can put it in other things. It does take on flavors, but it has a wonderful flavor all its own. And by the way, we weren't going to talk about this, but since you brought up baked tofu, here's a 3 ingredient recipe. It's
Oh.
called tofuna, and it's the recipe that I probably have made the most in my life. So you take the package of baked tofu, you crumble it up with your hands. I use about a half a cup of vegan mayonnaise, 1 or 2 stalks of celery,
Hmm.
really fine. Once in a while, I'll throw in nutritional yeast. That's it. So I've been at events where I've demoed and I made this, and people say, "Oh my gosh, you can make a living out of this. You should sell it." I said, "Pete, this literally has 3 ingredients. You can do this."
Oh, that's amazing.
I don't want to go into the cooking, I mean, into the distribution business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You want to write the recipes and not have to be figuring out how to produce them and sell them everywhere. Yeah.
And distribute it. And, really 3 ingredients. Anybody can do this. And it is really delicious. Anybody who ever has ever thought that they didn't like tofu has just almost breathed this in. I
Oh.
make it almost all the time if we're having guests for a lunch. No matter
Oh.
what else I'm making, that's on the table because
That's
it's
a
almost a huge hit.
I love that idea. My kids don't like tofu. Well, or they think they don't like tofu or whatever it is, but this would be a great thing for me to
Anybody
try.
who thinks they don't like tofu will like this.
Oh.
It will remind them of something familiar.
So we are talking, well, we're talking not on this day, but the day this is going live is Veganuary. We talked about this before the call, January 4th. And your book is Soups for All Seasons. What is, maybe other than the vegan chicken noodle soup, soup that you love for this like early in the new year, Veganuary kind of time?
Oh, that's a great question. And the way I have the book set up actually is by season.
Oh.
So you can literally go, I mean, you can mix and match, and we always do. Sometimes we make hot soup in the summer. Never cold soup in the winter, though. That doesn't seem smart. But I absolutely love root vegetables. And
Mm.
so I'm turning right to this hearty winter root soup. And I think that's a really perfect one to start the year with. It has rutabaga, which I think is an underused vegetable. It's very flavorful. Carrots, potatoes, parsnips, all the really good
Mm.
roots. And then it's kind of in a little bit of a creamy base with plant-based milk and vegan cheese, cheddar cheese shreds.
Uh-huh.
And I have to say, I want to give a shout out to vegan cheese because, you and I have been doing this, what we're doing for many years. And I would say that vegan cheeses have gotten so much better, maybe within the last 10 years. Vegan plant-based milks as well. So I remember the book that I came out in 2011, there was still just rice milk and soy milk. Now
Right.
there's everything.
Yeah.
And my preferred is oat milk.
I was just
It's
gonna say that's my
yeah,
favorite.
yeah, it's creamy. It has a flavor that's very similar to milk, I think,
Mhm.
because, I've been vegan now for 22 years, and it really holds up very well in cooking.
I taste a little bit of the oat in it, but in like a soup, I want to say like barley like. Do you know what I mean? It adds that like,
Absolutely.
so it just fits perfectly. You might think
Yes.
like, why would I want oat flavor in my soup? But then it's just this like nutty, grainy, tiny little background flavor.
Oh, you're right. And that's what makes it, I think, really very fitting for winter
Uh-huh.
soups because you have a lot of those ingredients in there anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to know, okay, this is a good thing to think about because I am not vegan or vegetarian, so most of my soups do end up starting with some kind of chicken or beef stock or something along those lines. When you are doing vegan soups and you want to make those broths extra delicious. Oh, I'm thinking even fish sauce is something that I turn to sometimes too. I'll put a little bit of fish sauce into something to bring up that umami. Those things are not available. What are some of your go-to like power booster flavors for those broths?
Yes, and I feel like that may be a little bit repetitious in the recipes, but that's because they work.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So most fall, winter, and maybe even spring soups, you've got to start with an onion saute. That's almost a must.
Yeah.
And I really like flavorful bouillon cubes, and I also like the kind of urban spice seasoning mixes that you can get at
Hmm.
any supermarket, like Mrs. Dash from the supermarket
Right.
or the health food store. There's Spike, those kind of seasoning blends. And sometimes I use both in a soup. I'll use a bouillon cube and I'll use that seasoning blend.
Hmm.
And that really does bring up the flavor wonderfully. Once in a while, when it's just a really, really brothy soup, like a miso soup, I might start with one of those 32-ounce packages of a vegetable broth.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Usually,
And when you're doing a bouillon cube, you're doing just like a basic vegetable one, or
yes,
I think I've used a mushroom one before too. That
that's
was
a
really
good
nice.
idea too.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing. It's the onion base and then some really good stock or bouillon and spices. That's what you're doing.
Right. And if it's a kind of an Asian-y flavor, of course, then you have the ginger. And, we have to give a shout out to garlic. Can't leave that out. Sometimes instead of just the soy sauce, maybe a flavorful teriyaki sauce, because that has
Mm.
more of the seasonings in it. It's
Yeah.
not just salt.
Yep, yep, yep. No, that makes sense. So, okay, we're going to talk about a recipe that you've brought to walk us through in a moment, but I want to ask if, of all the other books that you have out there, do you have another favorite that you'd like to tell us about?
I feel really fortunate that I've been able to revise and update a few of my books. And that's what, when people say, how many books have you written? I feel like, do I count all the editions or do I not count them? So, I usually say 15-ish. And I've also written some other visual nonfiction, which probably brings the total up to about 20, maybe more at this point. I've lost track.
Oh, wait, what is visual nonfiction?
Oh, well, books that are not novels or,
Uh-huh.
fiction or poetry in any way, but that have a visual element to them. They're highly visual. For example, my book, Literary Lady's Guide to the Writing Life, is a
Oh,
history of women writers and their personal journeys as writers. So it's a really visual book. And that led to me creating my website archive, literaryladiesguide.com. That's one place people can find me, by the way. But going back to my cookbooks, my first book is called Vegetariana. It was illustrated by me. I am a trained graphic designer and illustrator, not a
mm.
trained chef or cook. I've always really identified as a home cook, which is why I feel like I wanted to create recipes that are really doable for the average home cook with an average kitchen and very little time. So Vegetariana is highly illustrated. And during COVID, during the depths of COVID, I guess it was 2020, I decided to revise it for the last time and veganize it and add some more drawings. And I found to my surprise that doing the drawings was much harder than it was when I did it the first time around a few decades ago. I don't know if it has to do with the patience or the vision, but it was still fun and it was still really satisfying to come out with the hardcover edition that I've always wanted.
Oh, that's exciting. So that's still available. That the
It is
newest
still
edition is.
available, the new edition. That's the fourth edition, Vegetariana, with lore and recipes.
Did you say you veganized that one? So it was
Did.
originally vegetarian, but now it's fully vegan.
First three editions were vegetarian. The last edition is vegan. Yes.
And if somebody gets their hands on this, all the illustrations are done by you.
Yes, that's right.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so great. I love it.
It's,
So, Nava, have you brought a recipe to tell us about today?
I sure have. What would you like to know first?
Which recipe have you chosen?
It's mellow sweet potato soup.
Ooh. Is this from the Soup and Stews book?
It is.
And why have you chosen this one?
I think sweet potatoes are just the perfect fall and winter vegetable. I don't know anybody who doesn't like sweet potatoes. And it's also just a beautiful soup. It's so vibrant and vivid. It has that beautiful orange color that, if it's a gloomy day or a snowy day or just, any kind of winter day, there's just something very cheering about it.
Yeah, it's going to be like bright, bright orange.
Yes. And in this new edition, I've also added a topping of sautéed kale. And in the winter, we'll have to use frozen corn kernels, but that's okay.
Mhm.
And it just goes in the middle with a slice of lime and some cilantro. And it is just a gorgeous bowlful.
Oh, it sounds beautiful. So you got the orange and then the yellow corn and green cilantro. So just very like bright summery colors with all the comforting flavors.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love it. So where do you start when you're making this one?
Well, I start with that onion saute, and I see in this one I call for 2 onions. And after that, we add carrots and celery, and those all go into the saute. So that
Mhm.
really brings up their flavor. Then enough water is added to cover all but an inch of the vegetables. Oh, the sweet potato. Okay, let's go to sweet potato. For 6 cups of peeled diced sweet potatoes, about 3 to 4 medium large sweet potatoes. So this is the thing about soups. They don't absolutely have to be so exact. So let's say you have an extra sweet potato that you want to use up. So
Mhm,
use a little bit of extra water.
mhm,
That's it.
mhm.
It doesn't change a lot. And the thing is, the thing about soup too is that everybody needs to season soups to their own taste.
I agree. And also, I don't know if this is something that you've noticed, but it's something I notice with like sauces and soups. I try to season, especially with the salt, towards the end more because of all the evaporating going on. Like I've had this, especially years ago when I was starting, I'm making this delicious chili or soup and I'm tasting it and it's delicious. And then an hour later, it's like way too salty and I'm having to add water or things. Do you know what I mean?
I agree 100%. And that's why salt and freshly ground pepper are always the last ingredients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, everything cooks down. You want everything to have a chance to flavor up before you add. And I am a fan of salt in soup.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it just, at the end, it just really heightens and brings together all the flavors.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you wait to the end and then you have, whatever you need. And if you're not sure, pass around the salt shaker. People can season to their own taste as well.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have salt on everything that I eat at the table. Like very few things. It's like eggs, pierogies. There's a few things that I always salt at the table. And soup is one that I like will grab the salt shaker when we're setting the table for having soup for sure and be like, somebody is gonna want salt on this dish.
Absolutely.
It's really
Yeah.
nice. Okay, so you get the sweet potatoes in there with the vegetables and the water, and what happens next?
Yes, then you bring it to a slow simmer, to a no, rapid simmer, and then you simmer it gently with a cover ajar until the sweet potatoes and the other vegetables are tender. So this one you want to have a little bit more tender than usual because we're going to be pureeing it
Oh.
or mostly pureeing it. Again, this is the wonderful thing about soups. They're really flexible. Someone might really enjoy a very creamy, kind of dreamy texture, or you can leave it a little bit chunky.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
in the third step, you say you remove about half of the solid vegetables with a slotted spoon and you transfer it to a food processor with a half a cup of the cooking liquid, or we take our magical immersion blender. Now, I feel like that is such an essential tool for soups
Hmm.
because you don't have to then schlep the soup out of the pot into the food processor or into a blender. You just
Hmm.
put the immersion blender right in. And then again, you can have more control over the texture. You can make it really creamy. You can leave it a little chunky. So that's what I recommend. I have to say, I got a combination immersion blender and mini prep. One of the good brands, I don't know, was maybe $39, and I would say it's worth its weight in
Hmm.
gold.
Hmm. I love my immersion blender. It's so true.
Yeah. Right. And with a mini prep, it makes it so useful.
It's funny. The immersion blender is one of those things I'll say. I've had this experience with different gadgets that have come into my world where I've resisted for a long time. I don't need that. Like the Instant Pot. I don't need that. I've got a perfectly good oven and stove. Why would I need this thing? The immersion blender. I've got a great blender. Why would I need this tool all the chefs are using on TV shows? And then I ended up with one and I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
understand. This is,
Right. It's so useful. It's so useful, especially for soup lovers.
yeah, yeah.
Well, anyway, once you've pureed either all or part of it, again, that's in the cook's hands, then you add enough plant-based milk to give the soup a slightly thick consistency. So I said 1.5 cups unsweetened plant-based milk or as needed. Sometimes you write a book and then you have regrets later. I wish I had said unsweetened plant-based milk or coconut milk because
Oh,
coconut milk and sweet potato and the other ingredients, perfect match. But I'm not going to be doing a sixth edition.
oh
So this
no.
is for your, no, no, for your, because I feel like this, aside from that, this is the perfect edition.
There you go.
Then if people want to make the topping, I don't say it's optional, but everything's an option. You take a tablespoon of olive oil, you have 6 kale leaves. I say preferably lacinato. It's also called dinosaur kale, the long, narrow ones, because you don't necessarily have to stem it like with the regular curly kale. I'm not a big fan of the stems, even though they are usable.
Mhm.
And you saute the kale until it wilts. Then you have the fresh or frozen corn kernels, 2 scallions, and a quarter cup of cilantro leaves, and you mix it all in the skillet. Then once you ladle the sweet potato soup into the individual bowls, you top them with this really colorful topping.
It sounds delicious, yeah. Oh, and yeah, and you know what? You're right. The coconut milk would be amazing with the cilantro and the scallion and the sweet potato.
Yeah,
Really, really nice.
yeah. Why didn't I think of that? But it does say unsweetened plant-based milk, so maybe somebody will think about the coconut milk. Anyway, I do have a really an amazing story that goes with this soup.
Oh, do tell.
So, a local reader of mine wanted to purchase a couple of copies from me so that I could sign them for her and that she could give them for gifts. She came with a piece of paper. I also have this soup on my website, by the way. She,
Okay.
she came with a printout of this recipe from my website, but with a lot of notes on it because she times 12'd it.
Oh,
She volunteers for a soup kitchen in a neighboring city and they deliver the soups or the foods, I should say, not just soups, to shut-ins. She said they got so many phone calls after they delivered the soup that
oh,
people felt so nourished and so comforted by it and asked if they could possibly get it again. And that made me feel so good. But what I was really amazed by was seeing her notes about how they made it in a quantity times 12 from the original.
yeah.
And
Wow.
it's still, they didn't do the topping. They made just the
Hmm.
sweet potato
Hmm.
soup.
Hmm.
And she said it was their biggest hit ever.
Oh,
So
wow.
that,
That's so
that really,
nice.
that really warmed my heart.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know that it was delicious, but to know that everybody felt so like connected and nourished from this thing that you created.
Right. And you don't have to be vegetarian or vegan to appreciate a soup
Mhm,
like
mhm.
this.
No, absolutely. Well, I cannot wait to try this soup. I'm super excited. Nava, can you let people know if they want to see what you're doing, new works, or just keep up with all of your brilliant, delicious food? Where's the best place for them to find you?
So they can find me at theveganatlas.com. And if you go to any recipe, you'll see a subscription form kind of pop up, and that leads to my Substack. I send out a Substack newsletter twice a week. One is just general topics, food related tips. I try to be very generous in my newsletters. And then a special newsletter, it goes out on Sunday called What to Make and Eat This Week, which helps with meal planning, which I think is something that all of us need help with,
Oh,
even me.
absolutely. Oh, I know. I know. You're probably the same. I feel like this is what I do for a living. And yet when I sit there on Sunday with my, what should I make this week? I'm like, oh, I don't know.
No, seriously. Because when you think about what you want to make for the week ahead, you're also thinking about your shopping list. And so it
Hmm.
becomes much more efficient. And I feel like doing this newsletter has helped me because I'm such a seat of the pants type of cook. And I want to make something. And then I realize, well, I don't have half of the ingredients.
Yeah, no, so true. Yeah, you need a meal plan. You need to know what you have already. You need to know what you need to buy, and it becomes this big, big project. Yeah. Well, I love this, Nava. The soup sounds amazing. Congratulations on the new edition of the book. It's so
Thank
exciting.
thank you so much. And thank you. I really enjoyed speaking to you today.
I enjoyed it too. Thank you. If you're like me, hearing from Nava has calmed you while inspiring you to embark on more plant-based meals in your life. And I have to say, that soup in particular, I'm just realizing that my whole family loves soup and they can totally get behind these sorts of plant-based soups that are so beautiful. To that point, actually, I would say last year was the first year that both of my kids loved the borscht that we serve at Christmas Eve. So previous to last year, they tolerated it. They would have a little bit. Last year, they both loved it. This year, they had more than one serving. And I've even actually started having it for dinner every now and then. But I put meat in it when it's not our meatless Christmas Eve dinner, when it's just like a September meal. I put some meat in it, but I don't have to. I can do beans. And that's sort of vivid in a different way than Nava's sweet potato soup. But I think that they will love this kind of thing. I am super excited. I hope you are too. I will put a link to Nava's Vegan Soups and Stews book in the show notes for this podcast episode, and you can go see more of her recipes and all her books at theveganatlas.com. So now in this part of the show, I usually tell you what I'm going to be cooking, recipes that I'm testing in the days ahead. And what I'll say is that I'm not doing anything super new right now. Instead, I'm actually doing some final testing of some things that I may have already told you about. So the first is actually the king oyster mushrooms that I mentioned at the top of the show, which we had at a restaurant just before Christmas this year. But I bought and cooked some of those up when we were in Belgium last summer. And since then, they have started showing up in our grocery store. And so I've been playing around with them and trying different things. And I want to try one more way of cooking them before I finalize the recipe that I am putting on the website. So those are getting a last test. The other thing is these salmon bites. I had already tested them. They were really good. We tried them a couple of times. And then, oh gosh, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was doing some salmon dinner bowls, and I was doing that same recipe for the salmon, except I didn't have time to let them marinate, which is what the recipe says to do. So I tried them without marinating them. I just sort of tossed them in the sauce and went, and I think they turned out much better. And so I want to do a side-by-side comparison to make sure that I am correct about which one is better so that I can make sure that recipe is correct. I think those are probably the only big things that I am doing this week. Still kind of going a little slowly after the holidays, easing in. But yeah, those two things I'm definitely going to be testing this week. As to what is going live on the websites this week, I have that whipped cottage cheese recipe for you on the Cookful. I'm so excited about this. I made it like 5 times over the holidays because it's such a healthy but rich and satisfying dip. I had it in pitas. I served it with veggies like crudité, and it's really just like your normal cottage cheese that you whip in the food processor, and it turns into a luscious dip. I like it with a garlic chili oil on top. So good. That recipe is going up. And then I also have a new lamb chop recipe on Cook the Story. This is actually, there was already a lamb chop recipe on Cook the Story, but since I posted it years ago, I've started cooking them differently, and so I wanted to update that recipe and get it the way that I now think is best. So those changes are going live on Cook the Story this week. As to what you could look forward to on this podcast this week, I'm coming to you every day with a new recipe. Oh, there is some wonderful Swiss chard and some turnip greens. We are doing that whole greens in January for prosperity and luck, green symbolizing money, all of that. I told you about it on New Year's Day when we did the Instant Pot collard greens, remember? And speaking of foods that are thought to be lucky for January for the new year, pork and sauerkraut are supposedly lucky, and so we're doing a pork loin and a pork stew. So there is so much delicious food coming your way. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast to get the new episode every single day. The easiest way to do that is to go on your phone, open your favorite podcast app, and search there for Recipe of the Day, and then tap subscribe or follow. While you're there, if there's a space for reviews and ratings, make sure you leave a review and a 5-star rating if you love this show. If you want to get all the links to everything I've talked about today, the best place to go is to cookthestory.com/ROTD, and everything there is arranged by date. So it's helpful to know that today is January 4th of 2025. Thank you so so much for listening. And thank you, Nava Atlas, for being such an amazing and inspiring guest. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great weekend. Let's get cooking.